Presentation is about art and collecting and is geared towards the budding collector. With us this evening, we have Rachel, who is a young budding collector, and we have Carlton, who is a more seasoned collector. We're going to just have a conversation about collecting art and what it is you look for and how you do it, what's the potential for investment, and why would you bother at all? And each of them will have an opportunity to share their experiences as we have this interview and this time together. I'm just going to jump right in and start. And I'll kind of pose the questions, and the two of you, I guess Rachel will let you answer first for this first question, and I'll go back and forth that way. So let's just say, I'm a novice, I'm thinking about collecting. What exactly should I be looking for? There's so much out there that's considered art. What am I looking for when I start collecting?
So I have an expansive view of what art is as well. So I think as a budding collector, almost anything can be art. And so if that means you have, you collect license plates from, like a license plate from Cuba. But making a collage of those on your wall, and collecting them and arranging them in some interesting way. But in terms of if you're trying to invest in art and make a real investment in art, I would, I'm a researcher. I'm a researcher, and I think I'm curious in a different kind of way. So there's an artist that I've been following, Bisa Butler. I'm sure you guys have heard of her. She's a quilting artist, and she went to my high school, and she used to be an art teacher at my high school. But I've been following her, like on Instagram, and then I've now followed the gallery that represents her. And then she did an art show in Katona, New York this summer, and I drove up there to go see it because I'm all about it. And I emailed the person that represents her, and I'm like, how much? Like, if I was to invest, how much would it cost? The answer was somewhere, I think it was like $80,000 to $200,000, and I was like, oh, okay. But in asking, the woman who represents her said, but we have a print coming out, and it'll be a limited edition, and that's $10,000. And I was like, okay, like that's more realistic for me. So I think you should really just generally connect with what you like, and kind of follow artists that you like. I like art galleries. I like going to the museum. The 30 Americans exhibit was in Philadelphia last year, and I went to that just so I can just kind of get a sense and see what artists are emerging, what artists people are talking about. Sometimes there's free exhibits, some like in New York in Bryant Park, there may be an art exhibit, or just going to different art shows, and just getting exposure and starting to pick up, who you like, and that's what style that you like. Some people like abstract art. I'm not really into abstract art, even though I think I'm kind of committed to buying an abstract piece. But I think your art kind of tells a story about what you like when you bought it, and then maybe as time goes on, and as a lifelong collector, I'm going to go through different phases where, like, I generally like people to be the subjects of the art that I buy. But, as time goes on, I might want something a little more abstract. So anyway, just talking to people, since we're, as a younger person, being on Instagram, following artists, going to Art Basel, you'll get exposure to artists there. Swiss Beats is a big art collector. And so following him on Instagram, you get exposure to other artists. So there's a artist, Sue Tai, that I went to. She had an exhibit in like a pop-up shop in New York, and I went up there one weekend and saw her. So it's just, once you get into the space and you start looking and following artists, signing up with different art galleries on their mailing list, and they send you information about different artists, and just starting to get a sense of what you like. And that's kind of where I start.
So what I'm hearing you say is to really, art can be anything, visual art can be anything, can be something you're collecting that you arrange and make into art. But also it's about educating yourself by going to museums and galleries and following artists and following other collectors. And we're hearing more and more about African American celebrities who are collectors. So Swiss Beats is one, Beyonce and Jay-Z are big collectors. And the other message is to buy something, if you can, that's original artwork is what I'm hearing you say, and not necessarily the poster that you might see. And I'm just kind of sharing, the words that you're saying, and then I'm going to ask Carlton that same thing. When, for someone who's just starting to collect, what should they be looking for? And I've already said, personally, I don't think posters are the way to go. I don't think either of you would say posters, but,
I'm gonna say something, but go ahead.
okay, so it's, just to hear you say in terms of just getting started, what should I be looking for?
Well, I concur with you, but then I turn right around and say a long time ago when I was pretty young, in the 70s, I did buy posters. But I was selective, and one of the posters that I remember was, I got from Poster City in New York City. It was the cover of Fortune magazine. It was a image that Bearden did.
Unanimous.
Right.
So I thought that had a kind of, apart from being a very beautiful piece, it had an ironic character to it in that the very people who were at least partly responsible for the urban crisis, they had commissioned Bearden to do this piece. But following up on that, I guess the first thing you should do is educate yourself as to what are the various categories of fine art, what is generally considered to be fine art and what is not. And I'll give you one example. In the area of prints, there are different kinds of prints, I won't go into all of them now, that are true prints. You should be able to distinguish that from what are actually mechanical reproductions. And they're often called prints, but they really aren't prints in the fine art sense. So that's one thing you should do. And there's kind of for investment purposes, a hierarchy of genre. Oil painting is generally, setting aside who the artist is for the moment, is generally worth more than print is, that sort of thing. You should learn that. But basically, for most folks, I buy what I like, and I enjoy getting to know the artist. That's how it began for me here in Philadelphia. I was fortunate to sort of hang out with a crew of people who knew artists, and from that I got to know the artists themselves. People like Charles Searles, Barbara Bullock, later James Bradley, Mo Brooker. So that was a joy for me. And then I would, John Dow, often would go to their studios, the late Lucian Crump. We were close friends. So that's sort of an opening for a person who is interested in collecting art. You probably have to start out modestly because oil paintings, sculptures can be rather expensive. But prints, particularly if you can purchase them over time, that might be just the ticket for you.
And so just to expand on what Carlton was saying about prints and about those mechanically reproduced, and now that we have a lot of digitally reproduced prints, and the prints that are still considered fine art are literally hand pulled by the artist, or they've created a block that they can recreate it from, and so they are selecting the colors, and every print is different. So an example of a fine art print would be a serigraph or a lithograph. Those are some examples. And certainly the cost of those will be significantly less than the original piece, but they still have value. And always remember, the value is to you personally. And I think the other thing to consider is established artists versus emerging artists. Emerging artists, usually you're going to find things that are at lower cost, and whereas established artists who have been on the market a while, who have a following, and their talent and skill has already been heralded, they're in general going to cost you more. And so it just depends, again, whether you're just looking for investment or whether you are appreciating what you buy and hoping that it will appreciate as well. Right?
I just wanted to add, in terms of the, not necessarily, I mean, if you're a younger person or you just don't have a large budget, I did want to talk about street art, and I'm a big fan of that. And I bought art from, I remember during Obama's inauguration, this woman was selling posters. She literally pulled a poster out of her coat because it was cold that day, and I bought that. Right? I bought that. I bought student art at the some charter school, Young Scholar Charter School had an art exhibit, and I bought some student art because I liked it. And I bought art in the subway in New York, and that artist who I follow on Instagram, he now has a store in the Lower East Side. And in the last story, there's an artist, there's an older black man, and he sits in Washington Square Park, and he does like these drawings of jazz musicians, and he like sings songs and like does little quips while he does them. And I bought one, and he's like, whatever you want to pay me, it's fine. Fast forward, the New York Times did an article on him. Right, okay. Fans include Quincy Jones, Diana Ross, and Laura Dill. And I'm like, okay. And he has a benefactor, some private benefactor, right? And so I think in the spirit of Albert Barnes, and if you know the story of his collection, which was buying art from young artists in France. I mean, it was, but he didn't know who they were. He didn't know who Monet was, and he just bought this art, and who knew that it was going to grow and appreciate. But I just kind of have an expansive view on these things. And so if you do have a friend who is an artist, feel free to support them and get them to sign your piece. Make sure you do that. But then I honor the art with framing. So I'm big into framing. So that piece that I bought from Washington Square Park from this, black guy that ended up, and his name is anyway, there was a whole article about him. And, but I framed it and put it on the wall, and it's a conversation piece. The art that I bought in the subway, people come in, and I bought two pieces from this guy. One is Black Mamba, is Kobe, and another one is Biggie Smalls, but people always comment on it. It's a conversation piece, and so I would encourage people to buy what you like, and if you connect with it, buy it, and honor it though, but with framing, quality framing.
Another question that comes up from a new artist and even from a new collector, as well as those that have been collecting for a while, is so what's the financial commitment if I'm going to really start collecting? And do I jump into, two-part question, do I jump into that financial commitment from day one or not? Go ahead to you, Carl.
Well, I've been doing it for a while, but the progression was as follows. When I started out in the early 70s, original pieces I could afford would be in the hundreds of dollars, 200, 400, 500. And then as I matured and making more money, I moved up, as my friend Barbara Wallace did. And then I started buying things that cost thousands of dollars in the multi-hundreds, between 1,000 and 2,000. And I think the most expensive one I bought was around $2,500. But it can go, I have friends of mine who I would like to purchase. They easily sell works for $5,000-$10,000.
Okay.
So,
So I told Robin earlier that I didn't hear that, Adrian, but I was like, you know, not to disclose too much about myself, you know, me and budgeting, it just, you know, if the spirit moves you and your pocketbook allows, you know, go for it. And so, one, I want to say that I'm an accidental collector. So I didn't set out to invest in art, but for me, art is like furniture, and my art costs more than my furniture. Candidly, there's no doubt about that. And so the first piece that I invested in, and it kind of touches on something else we'll probably talk about later, but I went into a family friend's house and I told them, they had a piece on their wall, and I was like, I love that. I was like, this is amazing. And I was like kind of taken by it, and I just loved it. And I just kind of like stood there and just admired it. I don't know how much time elapsed, but they wanted to sell it. And then they called me and said, do you want to buy it? Because they remembered that I liked it. And I bought it. I was like, I bought it. It just worked out that I had the cash to give them, but that's how I started collecting. And so, you know, the financial commitment is significant, but it's in I have a loft. It's like furniture. So to me, it gives my house identity. Art gives my house identity, and it's so much of who I am that I don't. But the commitment is significant, and you know, in the thousands. But you know, when you're buying established artists, that's what they cost.
Yeah.
You know, if you start on the ground floor, you start, or just closer to where, you know, you're comfortable. There's art available in every price range, but if you're looking for those established artists, that is going to be a cost, a commitment, but there's payment plans, and if you're buying from someone you trust, they'll work with you. Right, Adrian?
That's correct.
And the thing I'll just add about that is, you know, I think you've heard both Carlton and Rachel speak to is, you know, there's art in every price range, and certainly the emerging artists are going to cost less. They're probably going to be in the hundreds, where more established artists, and rightfully so, are going to charge, you know, in the multiple hundreds, you know, where such that it's, you know, the low thousands, or you know, up to 10,000. And these aren't necessarily artists who are in museum collections, but they're certainly in collections of other collectors, which speaks to the artists as well. And I mean, all of us, you know, watch TV, and if you pay attention on some of these television shows, especially those that are geared towards African Americans, there will be original artwork on the wall from specific artists. So it's worth paying attention to see what's being highlighted just in the media in that sense, not a direct advertisement, a more subtle advertisement.
So one more thing.
Yes.
There was a friend of ours that she was talking about travel in particular, and she was like, she told me to do it while you're young, because when you're older, you don't have your health necessarily. And when thinking about this question, I thought about that in the construct of art. You know, you really want to buy art sooner rather than later. And so when I think about artists like Lisa Butler, where at some point, you know, her art wasn't very expensive, but now it's $100,000. Now she's touring it around the world. Now we're in a whole different stratosphere, and you know, I'm like, okay, well, let me figure out how I can, anyway. But the point is, I mean, sometimes you might have to stretch a little to get the piece that belongs to that artist, or you know that you really like and you really connect with, but art appreciates, and that's one of the great things about it. Art appreciates.
So, you know, Adrian Moody, who's, you know, co-owner of the gallery, is gonna just, can you step over for a minute? He just wants to share something too.
I'm off camera, but I will say this, that you can, piggybacking off of what Carlton said, if you like something, you drill down on it. What I mean by that, you learn to negotiate with the artist. And for myself, not so much for Robin, I will drill down on the artist. If I see a piece I like, I know how to say it, what to say, when to say it, and what's necessary to get the artist to say yes. But that comes with experience. And it takes time, but if you, I've been in galleries and sat for hours to get a piece, and to get a piece at my price. And artists want to sell their work, so they don't want the stuff to sit on the walls. They want you to take it home with you, so you just got to be patient sometimes. And if you have a budget in mind, for example, if you say, I'm going to spend no more than $5,000 on one work or maybe a collection of works, and if you tell a artist that, or a gallery, that, you'd be surprised what can happen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, and we've kind of answered this, but once you're financially ready to make that investment, you know, where should a collector go? Rachel?
I have two answers. So one, go to someone you trust. Three answers. One, go to someone you trust. So, you know, if you need a point of reference, or at the Moody Jones Gallery, if you know, I've been here a couple times, I saw a piece that I liked, so I've connected with it, and I trust them, so I know I can buy art from them. The other thing, like I said in the prior story, tell people that you like their art. You'd be surprised. So we have another mutual friend. In her home, I'm like, I love this piece. She knows that it will be bequeathed to me because I'm like that. I'm like, if you ever want to sell it, I want it. When you pass away, if you want to leave it to me in your will, I will receive it. So that's another way, and another means. And then the third way is when October Gallery used to have, you know, their art exhibition. Last year I went to the Harlem Fine Arts Festivals at the Riverside Church.
Yes.
Brenda and I drove up there one day, and there were a lot of reputable art galleries showing their work. Some artists there showing their work, and so that's another great place to buy art and to get started.
Did you ever go to the Puck Building shows, the Black Fine Art shows?
No.
Oh, those were incredible.
Yeah, there was.
Everybody was there.
And actually, what happens at Riverside is kind of a smaller take on what used to be at the Puck, at the Black Fine Art Show. That was a phenomenal show. I mean, we would go up several days. We'd go up and then go back, keep going back to the show. And Adrian was really a regular, I'll tell you.
Get your price.
Right.
Get your
Price.
price. Wait them out.
Negotiate.
I'm not mad.
So essentially, you know, I think the message is, you know, once you have decided to make that financial commitment, you do want to go to someplace trusted.
Yes.
That's key. And again, there's always the street artist that you can make, you know, and the investment may be less, but it's a start. And the other key thing is original art. You want original art. You don't want the posters you buy at Marshall's or IKEA or wherever you can get them, or even Michael's. You want, you know, if you're going to get a print, you want a fine art print that will have some value. And I mean, I have lots of other comments about selecting art, but I'm gonna yeah.
Another place to start is traveling. So when I went to Salvador de Bahia for the first time, I mean, there's acres of black art. there's acres of black art. And so I bought 4 pieces of street art. Well, not street art, but it's fine art, black art. Some of it's huge, some of it's small. But there's so much art. There's so much art. And the rule is day one, don't buy anything. Just look, just look. And again, whatever you connect with, it's the same type of, same idea there as it is here. It's like what you're drawn to, when you go back to your hotel that night and you're thinking about, you're like, I need to get that. I need to go back and get that. But that was just kind of my approach. And then I came back here and I didn't spend a whole lot of money. I mean, I think there I was spending $250 and $300, $500. I might have splurged now, probably $500. But then there's a piece I brought back and it's huge. And I paid about $300-400 to get it framed. So like the framing, the framing, but I brought it back rolled up in the framing. But there was a piece you brought me like in Cuba.
We went to Cuba and
they couldn't find me.
I was lost in the hovels of the art world in Cuba, in old Havana, just going in and out of doorways, because the art was just so phenomenal. Same thing, rolled up pieces, all together, had them in a tube, brought them back with me. So that traveling is really key, especially places, if your goal is to really collect art by artists from the African diaspora, then any place where they dropped us off,
right? In
addition to Africa itself, of course, you will find art that you like and you may want to invest in.
I did the same thing. In my instance, it was Aruba, and I got a piece, an oil piece by the Aruban artist Mo Muhammad. I have to show it to Adrian to see what he thinks of it. So I bought that. One of the things I remember about it now is that for some reason the owner said it would take 7 weeks for my checks to clear. I thought that was odd, but
did you have the piece with you already though?
no.
You had to wait for it to be okay.
Which she did.
But don't you love the stories associated with your art from other places? I mean, now that's like an additional story to add to the layer of this piece that you already love.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked it. He painted in the style that I liked, abstract, and I was able to find a little bit of information about him. And I have to follow up on that to
see what's happening now. I mean, and I know South Africa is another place where there are a lot of artists, and of course sculpture. The Shona stone is prevalent in Southern Africa, not just the country of South Africa, but in the other countries there, also in Southern Africa. So just thinking again, okay, I'm starting to collect. Is there a medium that I should look for? I mean, when I say medium, should painting or sculpture or drawing, such as in graphite pencil or I'm going to say crayons, but that's not right. Pastels, watercolor, photography. Is there a special medium?
I've done all of those pen and ink drawings from Barbara Bullock a long time ago. Serigraph from the Brandywine Workshop. Prints, original oils, watercolors.
So it sounds like it just depends. I mean, we've had a couple of artists here over the years who, we think of it as they're drawing in pencil, but it's, the more professional name, I guess, for pencil is graphite. And their drawings look like photographs. You have to look at them a long time to realize this is not a photograph. Someone actually drew this with lead with graphite, and all the detail that's there that they hand drew. So not at all a photograph, and those can be absolutely awesome and really a good example of what you see in terms of figurative art. And Rachel already mentioned she likes people. She likes to see people. You heard Carlton mention about abstract art, and for people, sometimes you may hear that referred to as figurative art, and that's very common, that people like to see artwork that looks like them. And so they want figurative art and not so much the abstract. And the abstract may not be, your love at the beginning. It may be something you grow into or never like. In abstract art, you tend to see more the colors or just the emotion that it evokes out of you, and you're kind of just looking at it, trying to figure out what it is. And maybe it doesn't matter what it is, but you like the way that it makes you feel when you look at it. So there's lots of different mediums. Do you want
I was gonna say, I mean, a lot of artists have a chosen medium, and so you probably want to buy in the medium that they do is their artistic expression. So when I use the example of Issa Butler, she's a quilter, she's a quilting artist, but I was gonna buy a print, you know, and so that was gonna be $10,000 to buy a quilt, that was gonna be $8,000. So just to give you some perspective, you know, but then you think about artists like Van Gogh, I know not black artists, but you know, he does beautiful landscapes, and I think he's an impressionist, but he did 2 nudes, only 2, and so there's one at the Barnes, and so, but that's the value of that, because it's something that he doesn't usually do, you know, and so sometimes with artists, if you go outside of that medium, you know, there's value in that, but, you know, for certain artists, you want to stay in their medium.
Well, I was once told, famous African-American artist, Al Loving, he, because he's a creative person, changed his style at a particular point. And I heard that he got a lot of flack from the galleries.
That's not what people,
continue doing what you were doing.
Yeah.
And you think of a name like Romar Bearden, we think of him as a collagist. That's not how he started out. But that's how
he did that relatively late.
Yeah, he did that later in his career, but that's really how he made his name, the collage work that he did. And just to, you know, moving on with some of the other things that might be asked, you know, what kind of return on investment? Yeah, if you want to speak to that, what can you expect? I mean,
I would say if you purchase the right art, it easily exceeds what the return that I've gotten, which are not bad returns, by investing in the stock.
What's right art? What's the right art? I mean, how do you?
Well, make sure that it's fine art originals, what we call investment grade art. But the Charles Searles that I purchased in the early 70s, which is a original paint work, I bought that for $400. It was framed too.
Wow.
And I recently checked his work today, a similar work of about the same size, and it goes for $5,000. So what's the return on that?
And it's interesting. So it's not just the artist and the work that they do, but you heard Carlton mention the size.
Yeah.
So the size is part of that investment also. I mean, it's larger pieces may, you know, in terms we may see you're going to see a larger return investment than a smaller piece by the same artist. I know for us, we have some artists that we've collected over the years that maybe we spent a few thousand for that are now worth tens of thousands. And when you see that, you're like, wow, you know, you're just like impressed yourself with what you have in your collection. So, but again, it was something that we liked. I have to be honest, well, for me, I can't necessarily speak for Adrian. For me, I didn't buy things because I thought how much it was going to appreciate in value, but it's really because the piece spoke to me in some way. And I think for Adrian, I see him shaking his head. Do you want to say something off camera, sir?
You have to buy based on what it can appreciate for in the future.
But if you don't like it, what if you don't like it?
No, we bought them on Brooklyn, and that, well, I know I paid $8,000 for it, maybe a little less than that. And I went to a show last year or the year before last, and the piece that size was selling for 50 grand.
Yeah.
Wow.
Fabulous to see it.
Yeah, it's.
So I said to myself,
Right. So, and that is a higher end investment. So it was several thousand to then have it appreciate to tens of thousands. Of course, you don't realize that there's no realization of the investment till you sell the piece.
Yeah.
You know what it's currently selling for, but you don't realize that until you actually sell the piece. Once you decided on your investment goals, and I think we kind of talked about this, is like, what should you buy? And overall, it still seems to be buy what you like. You know, if you want to make more, you have to spend more. If you look at, I think the only artist to date that I'm aware of, African American, who has sold artwork, you know, over $1 million is Basquiat. And he's dead. He's deceased now. But that was just
What a
recent.
story.
Yeah, his story is so phenomenal, and I definitely suggest Basquiat. That's an artist I definitely suggest you just look up and see his story. And he died very young. I don't even know, was he 30? He might have been. He was either late 20s, early 30s. But you know, we didn't even see everything that he could have produced. And he was in that 30 Americans show at the Barn. So just an example, we don't have a lot of black artists that have reached that stature. Even the Romar Beardens and Jacob Lawrences are in the hundreds of thousands. But it's never going to be that unless we are appreciating our own artists and buying and investing in their art, which is going to be so important for
A
the
lot of
future.
art from 30 Americans was on loan from
Yes.
white people.
Yes, it was one, it's a couple who were collectors.
Okay.
And they had this exhibit that was traveling around the country, the 30 American
I think
exhibit.
we went to like 5 cities or something,
Yes.
but Philly was one of them.
And they've been investing in African American artists for years.
It's beginning to
is.
get better recently. Darrell Walker, who was a former professional basketball player, he and his wife were formidable collectors. So.
And you hear that word from formidable collectors, which is
Grand Hill is another.
Grand
Grant
Hill.
Hill. That's right, he is a collector.
Mhm.
Yes, I think Oprah collects as well. So, you know, and they have a lot more money than we think about in terms of collecting. But even for the everyday individual, there is art to be found that you can start your collection with. I will, and I guess we're kind of getting to our time. And but I wanted to, kind of have like that one last question, and then we can still chat some more. But what's the one thing you wish you knew? And I'll start with Rachel before buying your first piece of art.
Provenance. Provenance. That's the word. Provenance. I wish I had known. So provenance is, as an attorney, is the chain of custody. As a wine lover too, it's the who had the wine before you bought it? Who had the art before you bought it? How did you get it? How did it come into your possession? And so, as a new collector, I would keep lots of receipts. Keep the receipt.
Mm-hmm.
Know the date, time, who you bought it from. That's important. I just had my art appraised, and that was the question: do you have a receipt? And for something, I didn't think I had receipts, but I was like, oh, I do have a receipt for one of them. But it's, when you think about the art that I bought from a family friend, I didn't have a receipt, right? But the good news was the artist keeps a collection of his collectors.
Mhm.
And so,
Yes,
and then I Googled, and that's kind of how I found the name of the artist, because, artists scribble their names, and it was hard to kind of make out his name. And I Googled their name, and was able to back my way into who the artist was. But I guess he was able to verify that they bought it from him, and then I bought it from them. But if you have receipts, keep that, so also you can keep a good record of how much your art is appraised, because obviously it's worth more now than when I bought it. Well, not obviously, but it is worth more now than I bought it. But definitely keep good records for your art.
Carlton, to you also, what's that
Well,
one thing?
I wish I had a better grounding in the field of fine art. I really didn't have that when I started buying art here locally. I was only about 25. And I would buy on recommendations. I wasn't stupid though. I could tell if the work really wasn't fine art.
Mm-hmm.
But as time went on, I started studying the various genres and the different types of art, as I mentioned before, and how they're related to valuation. So I think you should begin there to invest a little time to learn that. Robin's touched on it, and she can help you with that too, explaining how it goes. But that's the one thing I think I wish I had back then.
And just to add to that, I mean, you've heard us all talk about educating yourself either through galleries or direct contact with artists, and they love that. They love for you to ask questions about their art, and so if someone's having an open house or an artist reception, you want to be there with that artist to speak with them about their art, and they know that you have interest and you already are building relationships. And now there's so many publications, and I'll include books in that. I mean, when Adrian and I first started collecting, there were very few books. We certainly have books here at the gallery that you can kind of browse through to get an idea. And then there's a publication. Can you grab that?
This is outstanding.
Yeah, this is an outstanding book. I'm not sure if it's still in print, but I'm sure you can find it. It's by Halima Taha, and it's Collecting African American Art. Yes. Yeah, we all have copies of this book. I think Adrian and I have too, because we bought it and then we were gifted it. So, but it's a really good kind of basic informational book. And then artists, there are publications of artists' work solely. So there's an autobiography of Romar Bearden. There's Lois Milo Jones, who was a professor at Howard, but also, an artist in her own right. And most people who are teaching art are artists. So, that's even a place to start with investing in art. Someone that you know is teaching art. I mean, I think one of the people we think about in this area is Andrew Turner, who taught art for years and was prolific. I mean, he painted on anything.
Ruth Bridges.
Ruth Bridges, who taught at Gratz, who's an artist and is still painting as she, has become a more seasoned woman. She is still painting continuously. I had the opportunity to stop by and see her over the holidays, and she was showing me what she was thinking about. I think a good publication too is, believe it or not, and people may not be aware, but that Hampton University has a phenomenal collection and museum, and when we get through this COVID, that's worth a trip. And I've not been there myself, but it's on my bucket list. Well, they have a publication that comes out quarterly. I forgot. It's the
Judge Ransom. She has art there, right?
Yes.
So that's how you get the increase too.
Yes. And I mean, it was in November, December. We had a panel. And Lillian Ransom was here with us as an experienced collector, and she has donated some of her collection back to Hampton, where she went to undergrad. And I'm going to show you the cover of one of the magazines, but this is something you could get a subscription to, and it is so valuable for both the seasoned collector and the budding collector. It's the International Review of African American Art. As I said, it comes out of Hampton University. I believe it's quarterly still, and it reviews different artists, gives you their history, their story. It's emerging artists, it's established artists, artists who are deceased, artists who are still with us. It even goes into collectors and collections, and it's a really good foundation for anyone who's collecting art, whether you're, as I said, budding or seasoned, and it's constantly bringing you new information. Philadelphia is a place where there aren't a lot of galleries anymore, but there are a lot of artists. And certainly we try to really expose the Philadelphia artists as well as others outside of Philadelphia, but there are lots of artists right here in Philadelphia who you may want to think about collecting. I think of Yolanda Ward, who's a collagist. I think of Anita Thomas, who is a sculptor who uses wire mesh. And then we have artists that also come to us from New Jersey that come in, Easton Davey and Martrice Roach. From New York and Baltimore, we've had artists, but and Pedro Fuller. So we are constantly, first of all, returning back to our history of artists that we've met over the years, and saying, hey, would you like to come to Philadelphia, send us some of your art, we'd love to show it, give you some more exposure. And this has been a challenging year for artists, because a lot of artists do travel with their work and do shows, and that is not happening during, the pandemic. So there are ways to see art. You can even see artists directly online. And of course, we were closed during COVID. During the peak of COVID in the spring, we were able to reopen when they let storefronts reopen, and are still continuing to bring both emerging and established artists to the Philadelphia public, and trying to educate too. I think it's so important to be able to educate our clients, and just to have exchanges with other collectors, which you don't get to do that often. I want to kind of close out, but I didn't know if Carlton, Rachel, if you had any last thing you wanted to add, or Adrian also, before we close out our session this evening.
I have one thing, and this is for the real young ones. I looked up in preparation for this dialogue, the Khan Academy, which offers free online courses.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the courses they offer is on art history.
Mm-hmm.
And for a young person who's just learning about art, they had an excellent course outline there, covering, going back to the Middle Ages and forward to contemporary art. So you might want to check that out if you don't know very much about art.
And I will say, Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art, actually, it started right before COVID hit us. They had a workshop series that was on Black art, and it was very affordable. I don't think they continued it online, but it was, I got to go to one session and then everything shut down. But there's always opportunities for exposure and learning. Adrian, you wanted to?
I just wanted to add that in the future, here at the gallery, we intend on having